Oh my. Oh, hello. I was just finishing up the last Bendis issue of Daredevil from the original run, or the last run, I should say, the Marvel Knights run, before we got into Brubaker. I'm working on reading them all, so if you're wondering where I'm at with that, I just crossed issue 81, the last issue of the Murdock Papers, and I gotta say, it's so different from the current Daredevil run, but it's really good. And I haven't read this since March of 2006, and it still holds up. It's still really, really good. It's so dark, but it's excellent. So if you haven't read it, I recommend it, but I think that advice is only about 5 years too late. That's not all I'm reading. It is Wednesday, which means I had a whole bunch of fun goodies to read this afternoon. Doing things a little bit different this review. I didn't really want to take any notes. I usually take a couple notes and just kind of gather my thoughts. I'm just going to kind of wing it, just because that's what I'm in the mood to do. The only thing I did to prepare was I ordered them from worst to best. You might be able to tell which the best one was by the back of the cover, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So let's kick it off. I've got 6 books for you. 3 DC, 1 Marvel, and a couple, or an icon and an image. Alright, so kicking it off. Unfortunately, the most disappointing comic book of the week, which isn't to say that it was bad, was Batwoman. It's been a couple issues since I feel like this book's been firing on all cylinders. It's not Amy Reeder's art. I think that people have to tiptoe around Amy Reeder's art because it's like Williams' art is so amazing and fits the book so perfectly that anyone else coming in, it's hard to judge their art without feeling like you're being too hard on it because they're up against some of the best art of the last 10 years from the first 6 issues and the Detective Comics run from before that. But that said, it's still... I like Amy Reeder's art fine. It's not the art that's bugging me. I think it's all the jumping around. We're going from a month ago to 6 days ago to yesterday to today, and each of those different time periods are following different characters. And I don't know if it's something that would read better if I was reading it in a graphic novel sense, but it's definitely not working in a single issue sense. And while most books, let's face it, are pretty much written for the graphic novel market at this point, it still has to work in a single issue format. Otherwise, why are you putting it out as a single issue at all? So yeah, the characters are still solid. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on between Batwoman and Sawyer, and the way that's kind of working out. I think that's really interesting. Artwork's solid, but the story is just a mess. I guess that's why it's the most disappointing book this week, unfortunately. Next up, second most disappointing book. I'm spinning this a little too negatively. These are all decent enough books, but Green Lantern, this wasn't a bad book. I think the story was lacking again. I feel like Jeff Johns' audience is sort of one step ahead of where Jeff Johns is writing. If you look at, the first 5 issues, you get sort of the Hal Jordan Sinestro team up, which sort of I think everyone was kind of anticipating or expecting, and they knew exactly how it was going to go, and it was fun to read. And there was the element of it's Green Lantern #1, so it's a jumping on point, so you're giving them a little time to catch up people who aren't as caught up as you are. But then you got to issue 6, and I feel like it started over again, where Sinestro enlists his help again in, it's obviously different circumstances, but at the same time it's like, well, we just did this. And so there were no surprises. It felt a little recycled. Now as we're getting into issue 7 and 8 with this Indigo Tribe thing, I'm I'm not a huge fan of all the different color lanterns. I think they were fun while they were fun, and the Indigo Tribe was the least fun of them all because they're just so nondescript. And now they're going to be much more descriptive because we're going to know exactly what they do. But it's like they're a little too powerful for them to be interesting because they just do sort of whatever the plot needs them to do. So finding out this history of the Indigo Tribe doesn't really appeal to me that much. So that's going against it. But also, I mean, if you read the last issue, you pretty much know how this issue is going to end. And I'm not going to spoil it, but one of two characters are going to end up as members of the Indigo Tribe against their will. And sure enough, it happens, and it's exactly the person you're probably expecting it to happen to. So I don't know. It just wasn't. I didn't need to read it because I knew what was happening in it already. And I feel like the last several issues of Green Lantern, I've kind of been feeling that way. So hopefully it's going to get better. I'm kind of excited to see what happens after this Indigo Tribe thing. I'm very excited to see. I mean, the big mystery is, what are the Guardians going to pull out when they get rid of the Green Lanterns? Like, what are they going to, what are they going to dust off the shelf and bring out to protect the galaxy? And how bad is it going to be for the Green Lanterns when they do that? That's the story I'm excited for. So I'll definitely keep reading it. But I was definitely disappointed in this issue. Alright, all the DC ones are in the first set of my stacks. I had 3 books, and the third book I got from DC was Demon Knights. This is a book I'm really torn about. I'm actually enjoyed this issue quite a bit. It's better than the issues have been. So in the first couple issues, if you haven't been reading it, I mean, I thought it started off with a good kick. It's got a great fantasy element to it. And it's got some great humor, and it's got great art. And the problem was, the further you got into it, they just started throwing in a lot of flashbacks and backstory, and it took a lot of the steam out of the book because there's sort of this impending invasion of this little town that they're in. And instead of getting to the invasion, you're going through all these flashbacks of each of the characters, and sort of very little things are happening in terms of the book at large. So it got kind of cumbersome going through issue after issue waiting for this little town to finally be attacked. That happened in the last issue and change, and so now we're on to the next thing. But we're back into flashbacks again, which is making me a little nuts. However, the flashback in here was very, very interesting. I really did like, and all of the flashbacks on their own have been relatively interesting. This is probably the best one. It sticks out in my mind anyway right now as one of the better flashbacks of getting some background story on the characters. Really, really interesting stuff. The good things about this book, first of all, they've done a better job, I think, than most of the other DC New 52 books on blending the variation in art you get when you don't have artists that can keep up. They've had a few different artists working on Demon Knights, and partly because they do have so many flashbacks, they can get away with a lot more, but at the same time, like, it really blends well. And hasn't been a single issue. I mean, I always take note of it because it's something I look for, because I'm pre-programmed to be annoyed by it. But that said, once I'm actually reading the issue, it really is not very noticeable, and it really blends in well. So that's a big plus on Demon Knights. It's definitely the opposite of what we've seen with Animal Man and the changing art with that. Another thing that this book is doing really well is I love the characters in this book. I mean, Vandal Savage is hilarious. If you don't like Vandal Savage, or you don't know who he is, or whatever, go pick up this book and just read the Vandal Savage parts, because he's just fantastic in it. Also, the love triangle between Etrigan, Jason Blood, and Madame Xanadu is absolutely phenomenal, and that's actually where this issue in particular really, really stands out. Overall, this actually was a very good issue. However, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be picking this book up, and it's not because it's not good. I think, honestly, I should have probably dropped it before issue 8, because now I have a feeling it's going to start to pick up, and it's going to be harder for me to drop. But there's a certain other sort of fantasy book that just trumps this one in so many ways. And, that's not to knock these guys down, because, I mean, This other book is on a completely different level, and I'm guessing you guys know what book I'm talking about, but we'll get to that shortly. What else can I say about it? The only really disappointing thing about this book overall is the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is good, but we're getting into Demon Knights territory, and not Demon Knights, but these like aliens. If you're reading, I know they're crossing over in like Grifter and Stormwatch and a couple other. I think they're sort of like the big Edge titles crossover mostly. So they're in a, like maybe Deathstroke. I don't know. They're in a lot of books I don't like, and it's not really a premise that really interests me. I mean, they're just sort of like weird looking aliens. I shouldn't say it doesn't interest me because I don't really know quite enough about them, but either way, they just popped up in here, and so if that's what this whole book is leading up to, I might be a little disappointed. I want to see more of just sort of the fantasy fun that was sort of promised in the premise of the book before we get on to aliens and weird stuff. Anyway, but this really was actually a pretty good book, and man, the Etrigan, Jason Blood, Xanadu stuff just made this book killer. So I do actually really recommend this book, but again, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to pick it up, which I'm sad about, but I've got to save money somewhere, and I don't need to get 2 fantasy books. Anyway, continuing on, I did pick up Avenging Spider-Man issue 6, which I've never read before. I'm reading it for the Omega Effect crossover. And so far, it's pretty entertaining. There's some really, really great one-liners from Peter Parker in here. I particularly like the line about Hannah Montana. If you're going to read it, you'll know what I'm talking about when you get there. I laughed out loud at that part. I don't want to talk too much about this book. I'm going to wait until the end of the month when Daredevil wraps up the arc. So, put this one on the back burner, but we'll probably be coming back to it. One thing, Captain Cummings, I believe, when they have these free digital copies that come with the hard copies of the Marvel books, I think Captain Cummings has been raffling those off. It sounds like a great idea to me. So if anybody's interested in a free copy of Avenging Spider-Man issue 6, post a comment down below. Ask me a question, whatever. I don't really care. Just post a comment. I'll put your name in a hat and whatever. And next week, we will raffle the digital copy off of this book. If anybody wants it, I don't know. I'm not really keen on digital copies of things. So anyway, all right. Penultimate issue, second best comic book I read this week was one. I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me on this because I feel like people have pretty mixed feelings on Mark Millar or Mark Millar. I'm not sure which way you say it. But I did pick up The Secret Service, #1. There was a preview in Kick-Ass 2, which I was reading while I was kind of on hiatus. Wasn't doing videos at that time. And it seemed potentially interesting. I like sort of James Bondy kind of stuff, and I like Dave Gibbons. So this seemed like kind of a fun fit. And also Matthew Vaughn is a co-plotter on this book. Matthew Vaughn is the director of Layer Cake, and X-Men First Class, and also Kick-Ass, which is probably how he ended up on this book. Either way, I think Matthew Vaughn is a very, very talented director. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily translate into writing comics. However, he's very talented, so I wanted to give the book a chance for him as well. And overall, I really, really liked it. Like I said, it's the second best book I read this week. The plot is bizarre. I'm really excited to see. So basically, the premise is it starts off with Mark Hamill, who's been kidnapped, and it turns out there are all of these sort of sci-fi celebrities that are being kidnapped, and we're going to ultimately find out why, I hope, but then we kind of break off and introduce a new character that's sort of going to be joining the fold within the Secret Service. Really strange book, but it was a lot of fun. It had some good humor in it. Very Mark Millar centric, so I mean, if you don't like Mark Millar, you're probably not going to like this book. But you know, there's a lot of cultural references and all that kind of fun stuff, but nothing too particularly dated. some of them are kind of outdated references, like he's talking about the Star Wars prequels, which, I mean, I'm always keen to talk about how much I don't like those movies, but at the same time, it's kind of old news, so, you know, whatever. I really liked it, so if you guys picked this up or are curious about it, let me know what you think. I thought it was great, so anyway, good artwork from Dave Gibbons as well. Alright, best issue of the week, of whatever week we're in. Saga issue 2. Not surprisingly, I think to anybody, based on the amazingness that was last issue, this book continues to deliver. It's paced a little differently. You get a little bit more time with certain people, I feel like, than the last issue, because they were introducing a lot of stuff. And I love sort of the sci-fi fantasy balance that this book is able to maintain. I think that, like Star Wars, people compare Saga to Star Wars. I've heard that. Star Wars, in my opinion, really isn't a sci-fi anything. It's really strictly fantasy. For me, for something to be science fiction, it has to take some kind of a scientific concept and talk about the human condition, or, you know, look at something about the world as we know it in a different light. And I don't feel like Star Wars, I mean, it's not to say that Star Wars doesn't, most good literature can do that to some degree, but I mean, you know, fantasy, on the other hand, is epic, and it's, you know, princesses and Darth Vaders, whatever. Anyway, long story short, I don't think of Star Wars as science fiction, I think of it as fantasy, and I do think of Saga as fantasy as well, but much closer, much more directly related to the fantasy because of just some of the creature designs and the magic that is in the book and the way the magic works and stuff. But anyway, I don't even know where to start talking about this book. I think this is sure to be the best book of 2012. I mean, I shouldn't be saying that. It's only issue 2 and we're only in April. But I mean, this book, it's gonna be good. I'm really, really excited for this week every month, because that's when Saga is coming out. Anyway, I don't want to spoil too much. If you aren't reading it already, read it. I will say one thing about the book. Some of the designs are really cool, and for those of you who know who Mobius is, the prince is, and he was in the last book too, but the royalty with the TV heads, for some reason, reminds me of Mobius. Some of the more sci-fi aspects of this world that we're seeing from Brian K. Vaughan remind me of Mobius, because it has sort of a Victorian futuristic element to it. Kind of a strange balance. But anyway, Mobius died in March, so to see elements of his legacy continuing on in Saga is a treat for me. So anyway, that's everything I picked up. I really, really recommend Saga if you're not reading it, but I know you guys are reading it because I watch your videos. The Secret Service, I do recommend, as long as you don't mind Mark Millar. If you don't like him at all, don't pick it up. It's not worth your time. Avenging Spider-Man, I'm curious to know who else... Ooh. Avenging Spider-Man, I'm curious to know who else picked it up for the crossover, because I don't... Who's picking up the Avenging Spider-Man? I don't know anyone who's picking it up. But I'm curious to know what you guys think, if you're going to pick it up, or if you're just going to stick to Punisher and Daredevil, or just Daredevil, or just Punisher. And then, if you're not reading Demon Knights, I really do recommend this book. I think it's very good, and especially this issue was excellent. But again, because of the amazing fantasy that is Saga, I'm really getting my fantasy fix now, and I don't know if I need to be picking this book up anymore. I still want to read and see where it goes eventually, but I don't necessarily need to pick it up on a month-to-month basis. Green Lantern and Batwoman. So I'm guessing you guys probably are picking these up, because generally they're pretty good books. Were you disappointed too? I was disappointed, I have to say. Anyway, so that concludes this Minutia Minute, and I didn't do a Minutia Morsel today. I forgot. I'm so sorry. But anyway, that's all I got. I'm going to keep reading my Daredevil books, kicking off with Brubaker in issue issue 82. So anyway, I'm reading. See you later.